Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about the process value analysis. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand lean methodology, describe the process of value analysis, learn the components and categories in a value analysis, and lastly, distinguish VAs from NVAs. So here is an image of a traffic congestion along the intersection of Commonwealth Avenue and University Avenue going to UP Diliman in Quezon City. So did you know that traffic congestion results in an estimated productivity loss of around 2.4 billion pesos? So that's around $54 million. And that is per day. So more than 800 billion pesos if we compute in a year. So every motion and every step that we take cost us time, cost us resources, and of course, it cost us money. So the big question is, are we really sure that the steps we are taking are worth doing in terms of the value they add? Introducing the lean methodology. So lean is a business philosophy that focuses on providing value to the customer by reducing cost, complexity, lead time, and waste in all operational processes in an enterprise. At the core of this methodology, lean is all about eliminating waste. When we say waste, it is anything that is not absolutely required to deliver a quality service on time for clients and customers. So lean helps us to answer the question, are the steps I'm taking truly adding value or are they wasteful? So if the steps are wasteful, then lean methodology helps us eliminate those wasteful steps so that we can reduce cost, defects, lead time or the overall cycle time, inventory, even space, and of course, ultimately, reduce or eliminate waste. And if we can do this, the same time, we can increase the following. There is an increase in productivity, and this will lead to customer satisfaction, profit to your company, more capacity, higher quality, and of course, on-time delivery of your goods and services. So let's define what process value analysis is. PVA, in the context of lean methodology, is a tool used to determine whether a specific process can still be improved. So similarly, the goal of PVA is to eliminate the unnecessary procedures and costs incurred in creating a good or service, and of course, take note, without sacrificing customer or user satisfaction. So if we apply this PVA in our processes and even in systems, our result should be a good or a service delivered to our customers more rapidly, faster, and at a lower cost, cheaper. So we can streamline our processes to be more efficient. Again, PVA means high quality product or service with better outcomes at a lower cost. When we say cost, this does not only involve money, but at the same time, the time and even the materials or resources needed or required to produce the product or service. And when we say outcomes, so these are the results or the benefits delivered to the customer. And when we say quality, it should be the standard or the degree of excellence of the product or service. So these are the three elements of the PVA or the value analysis. Now, PVA is based on the idea that every step or every process is made up of three types of activities. So what are these three types? You have the VA or the value adding activities, the NVA or the non-value adding activities, and lastly, you have the business essential non-value adding activities, or commonly referred to as necessary non-value adding or NNVA. So let's discuss this one by one. But before that, let us define what value is. So value is what the customer or user is willing to pay for. So with this definition, we can say that value-adding activities are important because these are the activities that the customer is willing to pay for, whereas the non-value adding or NVA and the necessary non-value adding or NNVA. So these are the opposites of value adding activities. So key points: value is determined by the customer's perception of the product or service. So it varies from one customer to another. If an activity or process step does not contribute to something the customer finds valuable, then ibig sabihin nun, they are not willing to pay for it. So those are considered NVA or even NNVA. Activities that do not value or do not contribute to value are considered waste and should be therefore minimized or even eliminated. Now, for the value-adding activities, these are actions that directly contribute to the final product or service, and it provides value that the customer is willing to pay for. So examples of value-adding activities in our processes, it could be number one, assembling parts in a manufacturing line, because if you do not assemble the parts, then you cannot come up with the final output. Another example would be developing a software feature that meets your customer's needs. So for example, your Windows operating system or your iOS. So we need those kind of softwares or operating systems so that we can say that a computer or a laptop or a smartphone has a good feature. In contrast, let's discuss non-value adding activities or NVA. So these are actions that do not add value to your customer and therefore can be eliminated or reduced without impacting the final product or service. So again, typically we want to eliminate, number one, the waiting for materials in a production line. Ayaw natin nang naghihintay. Another one is the redundant approvals or paperwork in a business process. So sometimes when you transact in offices, there are a lot of paperworks that needs to be processed. So those are part of the waiting time. So those are needed to be eliminated or reduced. And the third type or classification of value is the NNVA or the necessary non-value adding activities or the business essential NVAs. So why they are essential or necessary? Because these are needed for the business to operate. But then again, these actions or activities do not directly add value from the customer's perspective. So what are those examples? So we have here number one, compliance with government regulations. So for example, if you are engaged in a construction activity, if you are the client and one person is the contractor, so in order for the contractor to finish his or her contract with you as the client, so the contractor needs to secure necessary permits. So one of which is the building permit, okay? And another one in terms of the processes here in school. So again, we have the ISO audits or the internal audits and even safety checks. So again, these activities do not directly add value from the customer's perspective, but they are essential, they are necessary to proceed with the process. So what should be the goal of PVA? There are three. Number one, we need to maximize the value-adding activities to ensure that they really add value to the customers. Number two, we are going to minimize or eliminate the non-value-adding activities. And for number three, since necessary yung ating NNVA, so what we are going to do is to streamline those activities para mas mapadali pa yung mga activities na yun. So let's try to determine how can we identify a value-adding activity given a series or series of steps. So number one, the customer or user must be willing to pay for it. So we have here a scenario involving a customer dining in a fast food restaurant. So the customer is willing to pay for their order. Ibig sabihin yung food that is prepared for them quickly. Okay? So the preparation of food is a value-adding activity because it aligns with what the customer values. Number two, VA must be able to physically produce transformation. So for example, in a water refilling station, the process of filtering water through multiple stages of filtration transforms it into clean drinking water. Ibig sabihin nito, yung binabayaran natin na 15 pesos for a bottled water, what we really is paying there ay yung pagiging safe niya to drink. So maybe it underwent a 16-stage filtration process. So that adds value to our product by making it safe to drink. And number three, VA must be done right in the first time. So when we purchase a car, so the paintwork of the car should be flawless, providing the customer with a finished product that meets expectations. So if the paint is not flawless and it needs to be corrected, ibig sabihin it is a non-value adding activity, yung pagre-repaint. So doing it right the first time adds value by delivering a perfect finish without extra cost or delay for the customer. Now we have identified the key elements of value-adding activities. This time, let's try to identify non-value-adding activities or what we commonly known as wastes in the process. So again, these wastes do not add value to the product or service, but rather it only adds to the cost and even to the time. So remember, waste is often a symptom of deeper problems within the process, and refine the causes of waste and focus on addressing those to improve the overall process flow. So we are going to identify waste, but the question is, how can we identify waste? So many processes contain wasteful activities. Our target is to eliminate waste in order to create more efficient and streamlined processes by reducing complexities in the process itself. Reducing complexity is one of the most effective ways to eliminate wastes. By simplifying the process, we can remove unnecessary steps that do not add value but increase the likelihood of delays and errors. So looking at it visually, if this is your current process, which involves green and red steps. Ang ibig sabihin nito, green is for VA activities, activities that add value to your entire process. And this red right here are your wastes or the NVA. Now, if we can identify all of these wastes and we can eliminate or just reduce them, then we can redesign the entire process. So if the length of this box represents the total cycle time of the process, then the redesigned process, we can shorten the cycle time. So in order for us to identify the types of waste, we use the acronym downtime. So downtime, there are 8 types of waste. Let's start with letter D, which stands for defects. Defects are any errors, mistakes, or flaws in a product or service that require repair, rework, spoilage, or replacement. So kapag meron kang defect, ibig sabihin nun, meron kang additional step or activity na kailangan mong gawin. So such as rework or repair, by fixing or redoing your work. Spoilage, ibig sabihin nito, you discard the defective item and then of course you are going to replace it. So replacement by sending a new product to the customer to replace the defective one. O stands for overproduction, and this occurs when production exceeds what is needed or happens before it is needed. So overproduction is considered as the greatest of all the waste. Why? Because if you overproduce some type of work or service, it encompasses many of the other waste which we will be seeing or discussing later on. So example of this, if you are producing more units than customers have ordered, ibig sabihin nun you have a excess stock, and that excess stock or unit must be stored or even discounted para mabenta mo lahat. So something like that. Another example would be completing reports or preparing for meetings long before they are needed. W stands for waiting. This is very straightforward. So any form of waiting or queue generating activity are considered delay, therefore waste in your process. Letter N is for non-utilized talent. So this involves the management of people that is managing or that are managing your process. So if you are underutilizing the skills, the knowledge, and abilities of your staff member, then that is considered waste. For example, if a highly skilled software developer is just assigned to a data entry task instead of designing and developing new applications, then you are underutilizing the capability of that skilled developer. Another one is if your employees are not given opportunities for upskilling or professional development. T is for transportation. So these are the unnecessary movements of products, materials, or information within a process. So take note, transportation is more on the movement of tangible products, materials, or even intangible objects such as data or information. Every item, if moved without adding value, so it leads to increased cost, time delays, and potential damage to goods. So for example, if you move products between two distant areas, for example, we are talking about warehouse. So there is a tendency to have delays in the transportation process, and it can even damage the good if not handled properly and correctly. So physically transferring documents between departments when digital systems could be used instead. So medyo matagal kapag physical yung transportation. So why not instead use digital if we are talking about files here in the process? I is for inventory. So inventory is having more materials, parts, or products that than the minimum needed to complete a task. Extra inventory requires space for storage, therefore leading to higher cost for warehousing or holding materials. So an example of this, number one, over-ordering products in anticipation of demand, resulting in surplus stock that may not sell, or ordering large quantities of office material that exceed the actual consumption rate. So kumbaga nag-hoard ka dito ng materials na hindi mo naman kailangan. So ang tendency niyan, for example sa ating science laboratory, if we are ordering many chemicals, many laboratory equipment, but our utilization is very low, then there is a tendency that those chemicals, those equipment may expire. Letter M is for motion. So this is somewhat similar to the previously discussed letter T, transportation. But what is the difference? So let's see. Motion refers to unnecessary movement by people. So if transportation is unnecessary movement of goods, this time motion is the movement of people. So it may be the workers, the employees, or the customers. And motion does not add value to the product or service. Examples are the following: workers walking across the shop floor to retrieve tools or materials that are far from their workstation. Employees searching for files or documents in an unorganized system. Store staff walking back and forth between the stockroom and sales floor to check inventory or retrieve items. So when you buy your shoes in a department store or mall, so often the service or the sales assistant would walk back and forth between the office store and the stock room to check kung merong available size yung sapatos. So that's an example of motion. And the last type of waste is extra processing. And it occurs when more work or a higher level of quantity is done than what is needed by the customer. So this often results in wasted time, effort, and resources as the additional work does not add value from the customer's perspective. So for example, you are polishing or painting internal parts of a certain product, but those are beyond the expectation of your customer. Ibig sabihin, hindi naman makikita ng customer mo yon. So why do you do those kind of things? Yung polishing or painting internal parts of a product. So another example of extra processing, if your Shopee parcel is wrapped with excessive wrapping, no, or high-end materials when customers are just satisfied with the basic functional packaging. So let's just see this slide for a moment, because based on our definitions, it may seem that these three types of waste overlap. So let's try to see ano yung difference among overproduction, inventory, and extra processing. So in terms of definition, the similarity among those three ay yung pag-produce ng more products than what is needed. So for overproduction, you are producing more products than what is needed. For inventory, instead of the word producing, you are holding or stocking, no? So stocking more products than what is required or needed. In extra processing, the keyword is performing. So you are performing more work than what is necessary or required. So that those are the differences among the definition. So example, for overproduction, since we are talking about producing products, so if you produce 1,000 units, when only 500 are needed, so meron kang overproduction. In inventory, since we are holding or storing materials, so if you are storing large quantity of materials beyond the current demand, meron kang inventory waste. And in terms of extra processing, since we are talking about the work performed, so ibig sabihin nito, if you are over or doing more work or adding extra step than what is required, so meron kang extra processing, which is not necessary. So here are the other examples of the different types of waste. So how to reduce this waste? So we have three principles for waste reduction. So the best way to eliminate waste or reduce waste is, of course, the elimination of that particular activity. But most of the time, we cannot really eliminate totally those activities. Therefore, we can do principle 2 or principle 3. So principle 2 is time compression. So the goal is to reduce the time it takes to complete the value-adding activities by streamlining operations and minimizing delays. So example, we are going to compress the time by implementing the just-in-time production, such as the one being used by the Toyota Production System or TPS. And lastly, we can do what we call concurrency or parallel operations. So the goal here is to perform multiple activities in parallel rather than sequentially in order to improve efficiency. So ang gagawin mo dito, if we are going to do concurrency, we are going to identify first what are those activities that can be performed simultaneously to reduce overall process time. So I think you have done this one when you did your PERT CPM in your Research 2 or Research 3 subjects. So example of a process map. This one shows the steps involved when shopping for silk in Shanghai. So again, we have used here the different process mapping symbols. So enter the shop, that is transportation, negotiate assistant, locate the category desk, find assistant, select products or silk. The assistant writes the receipt for you. Then you give the receipt to cashier, but first you need to wait in line in order to pay for the product. So take the receipt back to the assistant. So you may even wait a little longer. Then the assistant gives you the product. So you pick up the product and then exit the shop. So if you notice in this process map, we can identify several types of waste. So an example of this is motion. Because from one place to another, you move as a person in order to give the receipt to the cashier. So there is a motion waste. And at the same time, there is waiting because here, dalawang beses kang magpipila. Okay, so how can we simplify this process? So let's look at another process this time. shopping for silk in Swansea. So the first one is in Shanghai. This time it's in Swansea. So this process map is more linear, straightforward. You enter the shop, browse for products, find assistant if needed. You pick up the product, you go to the cashier, wait in queue, pay for product, exit the shop. So that's how you simplify the shopping process. Okay, so lastly, let's discuss the NNVAs, or the necessary non-value adding activities. So again, these are necessary in order to implement the operation, or keep the product, or maintain a system. So we have here three examples of NNVAs. Number one, if you are into meat processing business, then storing the meat in a freezing unit or freezer is necessary in order to maintain the food safety. But this step does not directly add value to the final steak served to the customer. Number two, in terms of the canned goods, no? So meron silang tinatawag na halal certification. So it does not add intrinsic value to the food itself, but if you are a Muslim consumer or customer, so it is necessary na matignan na yung binibili mong canned goods has undergone a halal certification. And the third example, if you're buying for an electric fan, no? So you must ensure that that electric fan has an ICC or PS markings by the DTI. So here are some ways on how to manage the NNVAs. So since these are necessary, we cannot really eliminate them, although they do not add value. So what we can do is, number one, look for ways to optimize or reduce the cost and time required to complete them. So for example, in our example one, the freezer, no? So you need to automate the temperature control systems in order to minimize the cost of the freezing unit for meat storage. Number two, what we can do to NNVAs, focus on meeting the necessary standards without going beyond what is required. So, hindi dapat tayo magkaroon ng extra processing, because extra processing is a type of waste. So, in your example 2 and 3 kanina, so we can only apply for certifications that are essential to your target market. So if we are targeting Muslim consumers in number 2, so maybe ito lang yung kailangan natin, halal certification. So key takeaways in this lesson. Number one, we have seen that process value analysis is a powerful tool to identify and eliminate waste from our current processes. So the goal is to identify the areas for improvement by eliminating or reducing non-value adding activities. So teams can therefore reduce the cycle time of the process, improve efficiency, and enhance customer satisfaction. So those are the end goals of process value analysis. So that is the end of this video. Thank you for listening.